Good evening all, and welcome. Home always feels safe, doesn't it? Until it doesn't, of course. Until something happens. Until you turn your back or leave, and before you know it, someone has come onto your property, taken your things, gone through your life, and left you damaged in a way that you might never recover from. Perhaps that happens whilst you're still there. For now, though, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. It happened in my bedroom at the age of 10. I always had trouble sleeping and spent most nights tossing and turning. I was a horror film fanatic as a child, and being scared was something I didn't have much experience with. I was not afraid of the dark, nor was I easily swayed by strange sounds or odd encounters. I did, however, know when to haul ass out of a situation, or to find a trusted adult. I always slept with my closet door open, which will come to be of some significance later in the story. I should also mention that my family home was in a heavily wooded area, in what some may refer to as the middle of nowhere. One night at around 1 a.m, I awoke to a sound coming from underneath my bed. It sounded like one of my cats was scratching themselves with one of their feet, or doing something to cause a thumping beneath me. I had heard that same sound many times before, and its source had always been one of my fuzzy friends. So this time, I didn't look. I closed my eyes and tried to resume my slumber. I turned over onto my left side, which left me facing the wall against which my bed was pressed. I heard the sound again, and thinking that my kitty was directly beneath me, I said, "Good night," and I was able to fall asleep once again. The next time I awoke, it was to a surreal and shocking experience. The sheet and comforter of my bed were no longer covering me. I saw a man standing over my bed, poking me with his finger, and the way in which he did so was truly horrifying. It was not the way a child would poke a friend in jest. It was as if he was touching another human being for the first time, exploring the sensation of the tip of his index finger jabbing at flesh. What I saw was so unbelievable, so impossibly strange, that I believed I was dreaming. I tried desperately to awake from my nightmare to no avail. The poking continued. He poked at my chest, my belly, my legs and arms, paralyzed and scared shitless. I yelled, "Wake up!" And with this, the man threw himself to the floor and closed his eyes, as if he was trying to lead me to believe that he was asleep or dead. I have no idea. It was at this time I realized I could not have been dreaming. I somehow found the ability to move, and I jumped from the top of my bed over the man lying on the floor and ran to my parents' room. When I got to their bedroom door, something came over me. I told myself that this was all impossible. There was no way that a person could have entered our home without breaking in, as we had always kept every door and window locked at night. I'd seen many strange things in my home whilst either falling asleep or waking up. By the third or fourth time, after speaking to my mum or dad about it, I knew it was my mind playing tricks on me. Plush toys did not have the ability to turn and whisper into each other's ear. Don't ask why. I have no explanations to offer for you. But I turned away from my parents' bedroom door and decided to hastily check the house for break-ins. What I found was nothing out of the ordinary. No broken windows or locks. No busted doors. Nothing. I assured myself that I had to have been dreaming or hallucinating, and blamed my obsession with horror for this. I made my way down the long, dark and narrow hallway to my bedroom. I peeked inside and saw no one. I turned on the light, got down on the floor just outside the doorway, and looked under the bed. Nothing. I proceeded to check both of my windows for signs of a break-in, which were not present. Both windows were closed and locked. I knew it. I was totally seeing things. I crawled back into bed and decided to just watch some TV in order to calm myself down and distracted from thoughts of this scary as hell dream/hallucination I had just witnessed. I turned on the TV, flipped to a channel with a seemingly boring program, as this always helped me become sleepy, and put the remote control by my bedside table. I was laying on my right side, facing away from the wall that I mentioned previously. As I laid there, my eyes began to adjust to the dark room, with the faint light from the TV screen. Just beyond the TV, I saw something that made my heart sink into the pit of my stomach. Inside my closet, with one of the doors now slightly closed, I saw the man standing perfectly still facing the wall, hiding, waiting for me to fall asleep. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I sat and stared at the man in my closet for what seemed like minutes, but was likely only a few seconds. I quietly got out of bed, hoping that the man wouldn't notice, and that my dad could catch him hiding in the closet. I once again made my way to my parents' bedroom door, still remaining as quiet as possible, and went inside. I shook my mum and dad at the same time, and when they awoke I just said, "Shh, don't make any sounds. There's someone in my closet." Both my parents just jumped up and said, "What?" I repeated myself and asked them to call 911. My mother immediately picked up the phone. Neither of my parents doubted my claim, as I had always been honest and forthright. They both knew there was no way that I was making this up, or that I was mistaken. I'm sure the look I must have had on my face made it clear that this was really happening. My dad told my mum and I that he was going to look, and urged us to stay in their room and lock the door. So we did. At this point I was beyond scared. I didn't know what the man was capable of, whether he had a weapon, or whether my dad was safe. I just stood in the room with my mother and cried. After what felt like hours, my dad knocked on the door and told me it was him, and that it was okay to open the door. My mum unlocked the door and let my dad inside. I said something to the effect of, "Did you get him?" And my dad looked at me with the most unsettling and confused look imaginable. "There's no one there," he said. I assured him that there was indeed a man in my room, and that he had been poking me. My dad said that he had just checked every inch of the house and found no one. He had also checked the doors and windows, just as I had done. Then it hit me. He must have a key. As soon as I said this, my parents looked at each other in absolute terror. Our nearest neighbour, a trusted and beloved friend who we considered family, was in possession of a key to our house. and she had regularly babysat me since I was a toddler. She was the only person outside of my immediate family with a key to our home. Soon after this revelation, the police arrived, took statements, checked around our property, and left. None of us got any sleep that night. The next day, my dad went to my neighbor's house and asked if she knew where her key to our house was. She said yes, and when she went to show him, she saw that the key was missing. Her home had no signs of a break-in, and she had always kept her doors and windows locked. My parents had all of the locks on our doors changed, and opted to never again give anyone a key, except in the wake of an emergency. I never discovered the identity of the man that lurked in my bedroom that night. The event left me traumatized, and it took a long time for me to accept what had happened and move on. My sleeping trouble turned into full-on insomnia, and for about a decade I was unable to sleep without a light on. It has been 20 years since that night, and apart from my parents, I have never told a soul about it until now. I've actually found that sharing this is cathartic, and I'm glad I have stumbled across these forums. My heart goes out to anyone who has suffered a trauma in their lives, and I hope that you are all able to find peace within yourselves. This particular close encounter of mine occurred sometime in 2005. I was somewhere between 11 and 12 years old. My mother had just moved back to her hometown of Kooskia, Idaho, a teeny little town with a population of approximately 654. She came across a little cafe called the Idaho Backroads that had a for sale sign in the window. She wandered in and discovered the place was still owned by a friend of hers from years back. They were an older couple who were coming up on their retirement age. They were eager to sell, and soon enough my mum was the proud owner of a quaint little cafe. We spruced the place up. It had minor wear and tear those old people couldn't routinely take care of, and reopened in the summer of '05. It was a mum and pop sort of place, called the Idaho Backroads Cafe, located in a small town on the Snake River called Kooskia. Kooskia is pretty much the last stop on Highway 95 if you're heading out to Missoula, Montana. There's a smattering of tiny towns in between, but Kooskia tends to get a lot of tourism in the spring and summer months. When my mother bought the back roads, we often ran into touring elderly people, families, lone travelers, and bikers. Our food was decently priced, and to several customers, it tasted like home. Well, the cafe was our home, and we had a teeny tiny apartment in the back, in which we all lived. My older sister, Talia, lived with my mother full-time at 16. Myself and Sienna lived with her father during the school year, until our mum could find a better place to live that suited 3 girls. We were excited to work and live in our restaurant. Yes, all of us worked that little cafe, as my mother could only run the restaurant and pay bills, not hire full-time staff on the payroll. Like I said, Kooskia was a tiny town, and once tourism left, we scraped by until the next season. As a 12-year-old girl might believe, it was great waiting tables. It actually was, as at the time I was a small blonde girl with gangly limbs and a quick smile. This kept the tips flowing, as little old people find children irresistible, and were incredibly generous. I saved my tips for various things a child wants, but mainly I stashed the money away to help pay for school supplies. My mother raised us to be able to take care of ourselves, and that earning your own money for things you wanted was rewarding. Our little apartment in the back was one open room, with 2 doors on opposite walls from each other and no windows. A narrow hallway led to a laundry room of sorts, with a stackable unit of washer and dryer, 2 huge freezers, and a linen cupboard. Another section was a ridiculously small bathroom, painted a Pepto pink, if I remember correctly. Next was the storage room, with our business/family computer, Windows 98 gateway, our bigger fridge, and a sort of walk-in freezer. Then one small step away, and you were in the kitchen of our eatery. Out back was a gated pen, in which we kept our family dog during restaurant hours. Reggie was just growing out of her puppy stage, with her 2 big ears and gangly legs. She was a wolf and German shepherd mix, and was starting to grow into all the muscles of the shepherd, while maintaining the look of a wolf. She was a pretty thing, all white, save for a patch of red that ran along her back and tail. She was bought for my older sister, but being a grand majority of wolf, she regarded us all as her pack. One particular day midsummer, we were all diligently working away, when a man came into the restaurant. My sister Sienna seated him in a booth and took off to grab a menu, water, and his cutlery. I was working that day as well, and something seemed a little off about this gentleman. All I remember about him is his dark, shaggy hair, his slumped posture, and more than a week's growth of uneven beard. She set his things down, politely smiled, and said she would be back in a jiff to take his order. My mother, who happened to be standing at the till, was eyeing this stranger with an unsettling intensity. My mum, in all the things she's done in her life, was a correctional officer at a prison for a number of years, and she instinctively knew how to spot trouble. She was very wary. As I walked by with an armful of dirty dishes, she squeezed my shoulder and told me to go take a break. We weren't particularly busy at the time, but it was quite odd of her to ask me to take a break so early in the day. I started to politely protest, but she squeezed my shoulder a little harder this time, and looked me in the eyes with that "don't argue, child" look that you just don't argue with. So I shrugged, dropped my dishes off with Jasper, our dishwasher, hung up my apron, and went outside to check on Reggie. When I walked outside, I left the back door open, like I always do. She sat by the gate, fully at attention, with an anxious look in her eyes. I reached out to scratch her ears, which she normally loves, but today she took this almost stoically, looking past me into the apartment, like she wanted to come inside. I couldn't do that during business hours unless it was raining, and we'd put up the baby gate on the threshold of the kitchen to keep her from trotting around. I talked to her for a minute or two, and turned to go back inside. She let out a whimpering growl, and tried to hop the chain-link gate after me. I shushed her, and told her to stay put, and she reluctantly obeyed the command. Being a clever dog, she would have opened the gate herself, but since she had done this in the past, we had clipped a chain around the gate latch with a padlock, and even if she was intelligent, she didn't have thumbs to turn a key. I closed the door, and she let out a pained howl, like she needed to come with me. I didn't wish to anger my mother by letting Reggie roam free in our eatery, so I firmly closed the door and made my way outside. 15 minutes was long enough of a break, and it was nearing noon. The lunch rush was coming. As I approached the kitchen, I heard a commotion. I froze on the threshold in mid-stride. Jasper had his back to me and looked extremely tense. This was completely abnormal. He was the sort of hippie type and was incredibly laid back. I glanced around him and saw the man from earlier standing in the middle of the seating area, screaming at my sister. He was red-faced and completely belligerent, waving his hands threateningly, spit flying everywhere as he loomed over my 13-year-old sister. In a flash, my mum was in between them, losing her calm establishment owner look. She had replaced this look seamlessly with the angry mother bear stance. Jasper and our oldest sibling Talia joined her as well, a wall of flesh blocking Sienna from danger. I watched, terrified, in silence. Talia was an intimidating 16-year-old. She often sparred with our mother and her fellow officers for defense training practice. She also played a variety of sports, and despite her short stature, she was pure muscle. The man continued screaming, making absolutely no sense as to what he was angry about. Quickly, my mother subdued the gentleman, twisting his arm behind his back and marching him outside, pushing him across the street to the gas station parking lot. He took a swing at her when she let go of his arm, and she subdued him yet again. I was scared for this man, belligerent as he was for even attempting to hurt my mother. If she lost her temper with him, things would get deadly. She didn't mess around with threats towards her children. He waved his hands in surrender, storming off down the street. I scampered away to the apartment before she spotted me, and quickly turned on the television, pretending to still be on my break. She came in looking incredibly calm. She scanned the apartment reflexively, her danger bells still going off. "Liza, we're closing for the afternoon. Come help break down." This was a command, not from my boss, but from my mother. These were two different people. I jumped up immediately and came out. Talia and Jasper stood together, looking ashen and drawn. Sienna was just barely calmed from hysterics. This is not an easy thing for her. She doesn't have the same temperament as my mother, Talia, and I. She is a very timid individual. We turned the signs, cleaned the grills, and set up for dinner. And my mum hung a sign on the door saying out till 5 p.m. Everyone went about their jobs in silence, save for the radio playing. It was an eerie calm. Mum sat in the corner booth with my sister, whose sobs had died down to hiccups as she explained the situation. It turns out she had gone to take his order and hadn't heard something he said. She politely begged his pardon and asked if he could please repeat what he had said. He just went ballistic from there, pushing her with such force that she nearly fell, then just stood there screeching at her. We all calmed ourselves eventually and reopened at 5 that night. Business resumed as usual until around dusk. I saw him stalking down the streets again. In this town, you can see the whole stretch of Main Street from beginning to end. I tugged on my mother's sleeve as she walked by me, and she turned to look out the window where I pointed. She stiffened as he approached the building. He didn't come in, he simply walked by, but he turned around immediately as my sister came by and looked at her. She froze and stared. His drawn, hungry face stared right at her. As he leered, he drew a filthy finger across his throat with a significant gesture at my sister. My mother wasted no time in calling the police immediately. The deputy, Carlos, responded as he knew my mother well, and they carted the man away. But since there is not a proper holding cell in the town, they had to let him go with a warning. If he came near our family or restaurant, he would be taken to jail. We didn't see him again for the remainder of business hours, and soon let it go. Things happen sometimes, and we figured he'd be gone. Night fell, and we went about our business with cleaning up and shutting down shop. At night, before we went to bed, one of us always had to take the dog on patrol, and we would walk with Reggie through the entire restaurant, opening every door so that she could look inside it. And I mean it when I say she insisted on checking out everything. We'd start in the apartment and work our way out, opening doors for her so that she could inspect. Tonight it was my turn, so I followed her as she checked under every table and booth, in the bathroom stalls, hallways, and the entire front lobby of the establishment. When she was satisfied with her inspection, she'd lay by the door to the apartment, and we'd reward her effort with a piece of deli meat, or the occasional hamburger patty if we had one left over. Then she'd pad off to the apartment and resume normal dog activity. We all went to bed around 10:30 to 11 that night. My mum and I shared a bed, while Talia had her own, and Sienna slept on the pull-out couch. During the summer, we left the doors open and latched the screen door. One on the top and one at the bottom. The top was a hook, and the bottom as a side latch. Like I said earlier, Reggie was a very clever dog and could figure out how to work things fast. So we doubled up on latches so she wouldn't go gallivanting around at night. We all quickly went to sleep, as we all generally woke up at 4:30 in the morning to start prepping for breakfast, when we opened at 5 a.m. Also, my mother was on Ambien for her sleeping issues, and she slept like a rock. Everything was fine, but I'd woken up a couple of times to Reggie letting out a hair-raising low growl of warning. I figured a cat was outside, as she did not get along well with them, so she was scaring them away from our door. I went back to sleep. What seemed to me like just minutes later, I jolt up out of bed to Reggie standing in the middle of the room, fur standing on end. I got up just as my older sister rose from her bed to inspect the problem. It was hard to see, as the back alley had no street lights and the room was dark. Talia took a step away from her bed and Reggie went ballistic. All in that same moment, as I sat watching from bed confused, she let out a snarl that chills me to this day, fangs bared. I had never seen Reggie act this way before. She was always docile and gentle. Talia calmly approaches her and whispers, "Reggie, what's the matter with you?" in a hushed voice. My mother and other sister are stirring by this time, and my mother is fighting her Ambien awake. As soon as she says something, I hear a man curse under his breath. Shoot, as if frustrated by the progress of something. Reggie no longer holds back and flies into what I could accurately describe as the scariest thing I've ever seen in my 20 years of life, and lunges full bore at the screen door. She's barking ferociously, snarling and emanating noises that sounded like someone loosened Cerberus, their hellhound, in our living space. She ripped through the screen in her rage, forcing the upper half through the mesh like it was paper. Now I heard him clearly cursing and screaming at our dog. Everyone was awake now, scrambling for lights and yelling at each other in confusion. Reg was caught by the midsection in the screen and struggled so hard to break free, she knocked one of the hinges loose. I heard a snapping noise, like a bear trap on bone, and the man scream. This set our docile family pet into a frothing frenzy. She would kill him, even if she had to drag the whole door with her to get him. I heard something drop, and the man cursing as he struggled to break free from the jaws of the fierce beast that was our Reggie. My mother reached the door in slow motion, kicking it open and simultaneously cocking her pistol and taking aim. Somehow she'd managed to grab Reggie's collar and yank her back and pass her off to my sister, who dragged her into the hallway and locked the door. I heard Reggie's outraged howl come immediately after Talia locked her in, and it both frightened and comforted me at the same time. The man was gone into the black of night, and my mum closed both apartment doors, locking them. She proceeded to the front of the cafe to call the police. In the morning light, we inspected the door's damage. The man from earlier in the day had come back for his revenge, and was wielding an intimidating-looking knife. In his struggle with Reggie, he dropped it on the welcome mat. He'd been trying to jimmy the pin from the screen hinges out of the hinging mechanism, and that sound was what alerted the dog. The police canvassed the neighborhood in the early light and found a trail of blood from our back door heading a couple of blocks west until it slowly grew to nothing. Police speculated the man was in a crouching position when Reggie busted through the screen door and had probably bitten him in the shoulder or arm region. They kept a watch out for our would-be attacker, and they never found him. If we didn't have her, I'm sure we wouldn't be alive to this day. Sadly, when my sister married, she took Reggie with her to live out of town. She got out one day, and a hunter mistook her for an actual wolf and shot her illegally. She was one of the best dogs we've ever had, and I owe her my life. I only wish she would have lived a happy, full life like the one she deserved, and got to live to watch over my nieces and nephews. Rest in peace, Regina. We love you. I am currently a 29-year-old female, and this took place when I was 14. I had just started 8th grade. I grew up in Southeast Texas. And, as I'm sure many of you all know, fall is still very much a part of hurricane season. It was a Friday night, and it was just me and my mum at home. My dad was out of town for work. I originally had plans to go spend the night at a friend's house, but there was a tropical storm coming, and my mum decided last minute that she would rather have me home that night. I was pissed. Tropical storms weren't normally looked at too seriously. I honestly felt like she was overreacting. Of course, this was my I'm 14 and therefore so grown up mentality at work. My mum did feel bad, and so we rented a bunch of movies and ordered a pizza and got a bunch of ice cream for a great night in. My parents' bedroom was on the opposite end of the house from mine. This is an important detail for later. We lived in a split-level house. The house I grew up in was built in the 1950s and was a postmodern style. Think Frank Lloyd Wright. The entire back part of the house was all floor-to-ceiling windows, about 8 to 9 feet tall. Think of just a huge wall of glass. The whole house was an open floor plan, so the kitchen was the first defined room with walls on the first floor, and my bedroom was directly off from the kitchen, while my parents' room was at the top of the stairs. This was a modern style house. and is a bit hard to describe at times, but I hope you can visualize it. She had gone to bed at around 10 p.m, and I went into my room to watch 2 movies that I had rented for just myself. The storm was really starting to kick into high gear, and the wind was picking up, and it was raining sideways. I was in the middle of watching The New Guy, and I still remember looking at my clock. It said 12:53 a.m. I was getting tired and could feel my eyes getting heavy. With the weather so bad, I remember thinking that maybe it wasn't so bad I had to miss the sleepover. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is a huge crash. It was one of the big windows in either of the dining room or living room. Our neighborhood was in a really wooded area. Then I thought that a tree or branch had fallen in the storm and had broken the window. I left my room and went out through the kitchen. Right as I was approaching the doorway from the kitchen to the dining room, I could see my mum coming down the stairs. I saw a man standing in our dining room, covered in broken glass and blood. Due to where he was standing, I couldn't get to my mum. He was young, early 20s, and was soaking wet and had no shoes on. He had literally run through our window. He was bleeding all over, had glass sticking out of him, and was standing barefoot on a bunch of broken glass. It took him a second to register both me and my mum. But when he did, he immediately launched into an explanation of how he was being chased by someone who wanted to kill him, and we needed to call the cops. My still fairly innocent 14-year-old brain didn't doubt this at all, but my mother was eyeing him suspiciously. We move into the kitchen, and my mother grabs her purse and my arm to keep me close. I had grabbed a kitchen towel to try and help his bleeding. My mum pulls out her cell phone and starts calling our neighborhood patrol. I notice this, so on our landline I call 911. We both finish our calls and are just waiting. The guy couldn't sit still and kept getting up and looking through our kitchen windows and pacing back and forth. He didn't seem to notice that he was cut up and bleeding everywhere. He starts muttering under his breath. What happened next happened really fast and became blurry a bit. But the doorbell rings. It was the neighborhood patrol that our mother had called. The doorbell sent the guy into a panic. He jumps up and suddenly grabbed a hold of me. He has me in a chokehold, and my mother is now screaming to please let me go. He starts looking around all frantic, and is pulling through the dining room and living room towards the stairs. At some point the bell rings again. My mum is following, still begging to let me go. He has me at the stairs, and my mum has the choice now to just go to the front door and open it, or follow him up the stairs. She runs for the door just as he pulls me up the last of the stairs. I hear our alarm start blaring. Normally we arm it at night, so you would need to type in the code before opening a door. He pulls me into my parents' room, but as soon as we get into the room, he drops me and starts to freak out. It was apparently all the lights. He starts smashing lamps, trying to get all the lights off, screaming that they're burning him. There's a small garden off my parents' bedroom, and they have garden lights that they turn on at night. He takes a chair and throws it at the glass, trying to smash it so that he can get to those lights. At least, that's what it looks like. I had crawled to a corner to get away from him at that point, when he completely turns away from me to grab another chair. I make my run for it. I run down the stairs, and the cops had made it into the house at this point, and were at the bottom of the stairs with their guns drawn. One of them grabs my arm and pulls me out of the way once I reach the bottom, and takes me outside to an ambulance and my mother. The adrenaline is coming down, and it hits me what happened, and I start shaking, and can suddenly feel pain around my throat from where he'd been holding me in a chokehold. There's a lot of yelling and screaming from inside, and maybe 10 minutes later, the cops come out with a guy in handcuffs. He sees me and tries lunging at me, which is terrifying. I had a bruised windpipe but was otherwise okay. I later learned that the guy was a 20-year-old chemistry major from one of the universities in town, together with some friends that are also chemistry students. They had made their own PCP. He had never tried PCP before and therefore had a bad reaction. They'd been driving to get some food when he first started acting paranoid and upset, and then at the drive-thru insisted they let him out and took off. Thinking you're being chased is a common hallucination to have when you start having a bad trip on PCP. Light sensitivity is also a common side effect in general for being high on it. But he wasn't a bad kid. He'd never been in trouble before and was a good student, and pretty much the last person you'd think of would do something like this. Our house was the only one on our street that wasn't completely fenced off, and that's how he was able to reach the back and those windows. When I got older, it hit me just how easy it is to become that kid. I had friends who wound up becoming chemistry majors and also DIY'd some of their own drugs. Thankfully, the night didn't end up worse, because it definitely could have gone in an entirely different direction. This happened last Friday, and I'm still stumped. For reference, I'm a male in my late 20s, and live with my girlfriend who is currently away on business. I work for a large financial institution in the UK, and often work until very late, as I hate bringing work home. For some background, we bought our current house a few weeks ago, and during the move-in process, I was away with work, leaving it down to my partner and a few friends. My car has also recently had a complete electronics failure, so we were just down to using just her car. The house itself is located in a small gated community off a country road on the outskirts of an upmarket town in the UK. It's surrounded by woodlands, and if you didn't live there or know someone who did, chances are you wouldn't have heard of it, or even knew of its existence. In total, there are 8 houses in the community, and the main gate gives access to the first 6, whereas my house is located, and then a further 2 gates at the top of the road, which lead to 2 very large mansion-style houses. The houses, which haven't got individual gates, are all about 100 feet away from each other, and have enclosed rear gardens, and the neighbours are all business types, who are very often in work and keep themselves to themselves. Anyway, about 2 days after leaving for my business trip, I get a call from my girlfriend, who seems shaken and tells me that there's a man standing in the garden, and that she can't see his face, but he's walking around and crouching in the tree line. So concerned, but not 100% convinced, as she does have a vivid imagination, and it's the first time she's been home alone in our new house, I tell her to lock the doors, to go to bed, and call the police if she sees him again. I return to our city's train station on Tuesday, and agree with my girlfriend that she'll pick me up in her car. Then I'll take it home, as she's scheduled to go up to Manchester for a conference. I meet up with her, grab a coffee, see her off to her train, and then drive her car back to our house. The time is roughly 9 p.m. I park the car on the driveway, head inside, shower, watch some reruns of King of the Hill, and then head to bed. Then get woken up by a light being shone in the bedroom window from downstairs. I get up to investigate, crouching to avoid being seen, and heading up into the study next to our bedroom. and open the curtains that cover some French doors that lead to a small balcony. My heart drops when I see that a man has now moved towards the back door and is trying the handle. The house is in an L shape, so although I can't see him, he can't see me without moving around from the back door. He stops for a while, begins flashing the light on and off back in the woods, before walking calmly back into them. I call the police and make a report. Nothing happens on Wednesday, but on Thursday, when I'm giving our cat a bath, she's a sphinx, she needs them, I hear the garage door being messed with. I'm in the bathroom directly behind the garage, so I move into the kitchen to grab a knife before heading into the garage to check what's going on, when the noises stop and I hear running down the driveway and away from the house. I call the police and they send an officer around to check the property. All they find is some knife marks and scuffs on the bottom of the garage. On Friday, I get my car delivered from the dealership and decide to work from home. I also park my car in the garage, leaving my girlfriend's on the driveway. At around 11 p.m, I'm in the upstairs study listening to music and working, when I find myself freezing. I thought I was going to stop breathing as I felt someone watching me, and turning to face the French doors, I see a man, nondescript looking, around 35, wearing a coat and gloves, carrying what looked like a torch standing on my balcony. Our eyes met. Now filled with rage, I go for one of my golf clubs from my golf bag and charge towards the door. He climbs off the balcony and runs off into the woods. I've never seen this man in my life before, but I'm sure it's the man that's been causing problems recently. It also dawned on me that he would have only seen my girlfriend before and only seen her car. Maybe he thought she lived alone. I've notified the police and have bought some more security devices to install on the property as well, and parked my car on the driveway with hers. We don't know who he is or why he's doing this, but we're hoping it won't happen again. A few years ago, my roommate and I lived on the 3rd floor and the back side of an apartment building. She was in the process of moving out though, so it was mostly just my dog, George Washington, and I knew just about every neighbor in my building, and from what I knew they were super chill. In order to understand this story, I need to explain the way my apartment was set up. In order to get to my door to enter our apartment, you would have to pass by my window, which was a very long window in my bedroom. I never had any issues, until about 2 a.m. on a Saturday. Well, technically Sunday. I heard footsteps on the walkway outside my window, and saw a shadow pass it. I usually am a groggy person when I first wake up, but ever since it had been just me, I was more aware of my surroundings, so it jolted me awake. I had a nightstick under my bed, so I grabbed it and debated about what to do for the next 30 seconds. I opened up my bedroom door quietly, right in front of our main entrance, and started to notice the handle jiggle ever so slightly. Clearly at this point, I knew I could either A, shit my pants, B, get attacked, or C, scare the person off. Choice A seemed like the most likely for my personality type, but choice C it was. I turned on the lights outside, kicked the outside door as loudly as I could, and screamed a string of words that would make a sailor blush. I heard footsteps quickly turn and walk the other way. I called my stepdad, who thankfully lived close by, and he came by to check on me and wanted me to stay with them. But I said I would be fine and he went off. The next morning I got up and got ready for church, not really thinking about the night before. I returned home shortly after, and was texting on my phone as I reached to get my keys and put them into the lock of my front door. I couldn't find the keyhole though, so I looked up and noticed that my entire lock had been bashed in. It hadn't really set in what happened yet, so I opened the door and looked in. A lot of my stuff was gone. Television, computers, jewellery. They left the dog there unharmed. The irony is, I got him to be my best friend and guard dog, and he only fulfills one of those roles. My brain caught up to my surroundings, so I grabbed George and ran outside to call the police. They came out, guns drawn, as they cleared my apartment. It felt surreal to talk with forensics in your own residence. They never found out who did it, and in the end it worked out okay. A lot of the jewellery they stole was from an ex, who I had intentions of pawning anyway, and renter's insurance covered that, so I got some sweet new technology upgrades. However, I am still very unsettled internally about that night and day, particularly about that night. I replay it and often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't have woken up, or if the person hadn't easily been so turned away. It's also very unsettling to know that they were watching me, waiting for me to leave to church so that they could break in. Ever since that day, I keep my head on a swivel and pay extremely close attention to my surroundings, particularly when I get home. So to the thieving assholes who scared me and stole my stuff, let's not meet again. When I was a child, from 3 to 6 years old, my mother moved from Sao Paulo, a huge city in Brazil, to a small town next to the Amazon forest across the country. She was a single mom with 2 kids, my brother just being a year older than me. We were rich back then, and we looked rich as well, even though my mother didn't like to show it off, but we always had nice hair and nice skin. You know what I mean. Rich people look rich, even when they don't want to. The only asphalted street in the town was the main avenue that connected the 2 highways, and all the other streets were dirt. There were no apartment buildings there, so my mum brought a nice house for us. The house had a small front yard and a huge backyard with grass and mango and papaya trees. She worked all day. We went to school in the morning and spent the afternoon playing with the kids from the neighbourhood, with a maid at home to take care of us. Mother arrived in the evening and the maid would leave. One day my mum woke up pretty late. She didn't hear the alarm clock, and neither did we. We overslept until noon, and this had never happened before. My brother always woke up pretty early by himself. Even today he still does. She woke up and realized the entire house was upside down. After waking us all up without understanding a thing, my mother went to the kitchen to make breakfast, and then she saw that all the electronics were missing. TV, stereo, even some food and her jewellery, clothes, everything was a mess. She then called her brother that lives a few houses away. Until he got there, she made us stay in our room, and she started to search the site where the house was built. They found out that someone leaked formulides into the air conditioning system. We passed out, they entered the house and stole everything they could. I was 4 years old, my brother was 5, and I remember this crystal clear. There were iron bars on the windows, and they cut the bars to enter. Now that I'm about 30-ish, I'm well aware of the horrors that they could have done to us, if they'd have chosen to. And the creepiest part is that we lived there for 2 more years. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. This topic actually wasn't picked at random. You see, my parents, I don't live with my parents, but They were broken into the other day. They weren't in the house, thankfully, but some of their stuff got stolen. And it really makes you feel quite crappy, to be honest, because it's just such an unsettling feeling. Thinking that someone's going through your house, looking at your things, taking whatever they want, it really gets on my nerves. It makes me angry more than anything. So yeah, they have a whole security upgrade today, actually. I think they've already put it all in, which is good. They probably should have done that to begin with. But anyway, it was a safe area until now. So yeah, it just kind of really sucks. But they had insurance and they're getting everything back. But you know, it's not about that. It's just, it makes you feel so uncomfortable and so violated. And now I can relate even more with these stories because it's horrifying. And it's something I really hope that never happens to anyone, to any of you guys. So make sure to lock up your house, lock your doors if you're not there. And their mistake, according to the police, was you know, like letting people in the neighborhood know that they'd be away for a few days. Just like, oh yeah, we're going away for a few days. And bam, stolen. They say that, I don't know the percentage, but they say that you're more likely to get robbed by the people who you know. So yeah, there you have it. Stay safe, guys. Don't tell people when you go on holiday, maybe. And lock your doors and stuff. Get cameras. You know, they're cheap enough nowadays. If you liked the video, sorry for all the doom and gloom, be sure to like and leave a comment with what you thought and how bummed out you are at the thought of getting stuff stolen, because it is pretty horrifying. Also, if you're new here, why not subscribe? It's not always, you know, disappointment at the end. Sometimes it's nice stuff. And press the bell icon for good measure. If there's a story that you would like to share, you can share it with me on Reddit and in my email. Both are fine. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, secure your homes, and I'll see you in the next one.